Hi, welcome to my video on the 6 essentials of sailing. I'm going to start with a little bit of memory recall and go back to our very first day on a sailboat. If you can remember, the most important bit of equipment on the boat on those first couple of days was the rudder. The rudder was used for everything. And 'tis only after a period of time that we actually started to learn that if we let the sail out, we don't have to use as much rudder. If we leaned out, we didn't have to use as much rudder. So this video, the 6 essentials, is all about reducing the amount of rudder we use. Okay? Because a rudder is a huge drag factor in a boat. And every time it moves off the center line, it causes drag. So the 6 essentials are all about trying to reduce the amount of rudder we use. So let's take the rudder for example here. This going through the water that way causes a lot of drag. A rudder going through the water this way has very little drag. Okay, so that's what we're trying to do, to keep the rudder in the center line for as long and as possible, basically. There are times, yes, we have to adjust to steer a little bit, but there are ways of steering the boat without using the rudder. And that's what the 6 essentials are. Trying to use other skills on the boat to reduce the amount of rudder we use. So the first one of the 6 essentials is basically trim. So trim is when we move our weight fore and aft in the boat. So if we move forward into the boat, we lift the stern, we push the bow down, we reduce the waterline length. And reducing waterline length is not fast. Okay, so we need to keep our maximum waterline length. When you're in a planing hull, yes, then we try to reduce waterline length. But in these displacement boats, we try to keep maximum waterline length in order to keep the boat going as fast as possible. So that's trim, basically. It'll come into more effect with the other 5, but I'm going to go on to the next 2, which are probably the most important of the lot, and that's balance. Balance is when we move our weight in and out from the center line. So we move our weight out in order to keep the boat flat. And the reason that we need to keep the boat going flat is, if you could imagine, this is the boat going towards you here. If you look at the 2 white lines either side, they're the same length, okay? So that means the waterline length on this side of the boat is the same as the waterline length on this side of the boat. So it's very important to keep that, because the minute the boat heels, like so, the waterline lengths change, okay? So basically the waterline length on this side is much longer than the waterline on this side, which is straight down underneath the boat. So the water has a lot further distance to travel on this side than it does on this side, making the boat turn like this. Okay? So a boat with heel will always want to turn up into the wind. Okay? Which means that the person at the back end of the boat, if you look at it this way, if this is it, the heel here, the person sitting up on the side has to continuously pull the rudder in order to keep the boat going straight. So here's the weather helm pulling the tiller, and you can see that the rudder going off the center line, causing a lot of drag here with the water going past the rudder. So it's very important to try and keep the boat flat in order to keep the rudder in the middle. And once the rudder is in the middle, then the boat has got no drag. Okay, so that's basically the balance side of it. If you can keep the boat flat, you'll keep it going straight without the rudder. But it does take a lot of work moving the weight in and out continuously in order to control the balance. The next one is sail setting. So again, I'll lift the boat up. If we're sailing along like so, again, the heel, and we have everyone sitting up on the side here, trying to keep the boat flat, but we can't because there's too much wind, then we have to let the sails out a bit. We adjust the main in and out in the gusts, letting the sail out a bit in the gust, back in again the lull, out again in the gust, back in again the lull, but not huge amounts, just enough in order to keep the boat flat. So once the boat's flat, the main is in and the crew are on the side. But once the boat heels a little bit, even a little bit, you've got to let the main out to bring it back flat again. Okay? So it's continuous trim on the main sheet in order to keep the boat going flat. Because again, once the boat heels, the helm ends up having to pull the tiller to windward. Continuously having to adjust the rudder in order to keep the boat going straight. So sail setting, I know we talk about the sail setting in the 5 E's as being something that the main is in full on a beat, half out on a reach, full out on a run, but we're adjusting them all the time in that position. So yes, we're on a reach, the main is out half, but we're adjusting it all the time in order to keep the boat flat. But that doesn't mean you sit down to leeward and let the main right out. That's a counteraction. So what you do is you keep the weight high, and if your weight doesn't keep the boat flat, then you've got to let the sails out. And don't be scared to let the sails out more in order to keep the boat flat, because the boat will still go a lot faster even if the main is flogging. Okay? As long as the boat is flat, it'll go fast. So the next one, which is a little bit more complicated, but I think if I explain it well enough, you'll understand how this other essential helps the feel on the rudder. And as you get more experienced, this will become a lot more evident. Okay, so if we take the boat here, for example, you can see on the middle of the keel I have a black dot, and that is basically the center of lateral resistance of the boat. That is the point that the boat turns on. Okay, when the designer designs the boat, they put the keel in the right place and everything, so that that is the point that the boat turns on. It's the central lateral resistance. It's the pivot point on the boat. So then the mast and sails are put in a position to suit this. So if you look at the black dot here and the black dot here on the sail, one is over the other. So what does this black dot mean? Well, that is the center of effort of the sails. Okay, it's if I have those sails and I put them on that point, they should balance on that point. Okay, it's the center point of the sails. So you can see I've taken the foot here and I've halved it, and I draw a line up to the head of the sail, which is out of video at the moment, but up to the head. And then I took another one and I halved the luff of the sail and I drew it to the far corner, the opposite corner here. Just get the back stay out of the way. And I drew a line here, and where the two crossed, I got a dot. And that dot is basically the center of effort of the mainsail. Just the mainsail. And I did the exact same with the jib. I have the foot, I drew a line to the head. I have the luff, I drew a line to the clew. Where the two lines crossed, I had another black dot. That's the center of effort of the jib. Then if I take a line between the two, as you can see here, I drew a line across, I halved it, I get the bigger black dot in the middle, and that's the center of effort of both sails. And the idea is to get that point over this point for a neutral feel on the rudder. Okay, so the rudder should be in the middle, sailing along with the boat being flat, using the other essentials. So the boat's flat, trim is correct, all the boat is in balance. If this is over here, the helm should be absolutely neutral. It should just stay in the middle and the boat should sail dead straight without having to touch the rudder. But the problem is when we start beating, especially racing and all that, when we start beating, we like to have a little bit of weather helm. Because if we have, for example, neutral, we're continuously hunting to find what close hold is. Does that make sense to people? Hopefully it does. So we're continuously pushing the tiller away from us or towards us in order to try and find close hold. Okay, when the telltales are running parallel on the jib. So what we want really is a tiny bit of weather helm where we have to pull the tiller just a couple of degrees in order to just keep the boat close hold all the time. So how do we do that? In order to get a bit of feel into the rudder, again, we must remember to keep the boat flat, trim, all the other stuff that we were talking about, all these have to be used in order to get this one operating as well. So in other words, if I show it to you here, if I change the rake, so I let the mast back, so you can see now, I know this looks a bit exaggerated, but it does explain it. So I've left the mast back. Now the black dot has gone behind the dot on the keel, which means there's more sail behind the centre of lateral resistance. So that means there's more power at the back, which is tending to push the bow up into the wind. So in other words, with that rake and the boat being dead flat, all the rest of the bits and pieces, everything here, that boat will start turning into the wind. It'll keep turning into the wind all the time with rake aft, okay? Which means you have to pull the tiller towards you in order to keep the boat going straight, okay? So we're pulling the tiller in order to keep the boat going straight with that amount of rake. And that is too much rake. So now we've adjusted a little bit more. We might say, right, we're not going to have that amount of rake. We're just going to change the rake a little bit. And how we change the rake is by actually pinning up or down here. Okay, so the feel in the rudder comes from the rake as well. Okay, so when you've all the other bits done, this one, which is, as I said at the start, is a little bit more complicated, but it's good that you understand where it comes from. So in other words, if you've got the boat flat, the trim is correct, all the other bits are in the correct position, the rake then is the next one that gives you the feel in the rudder. So if you think of an Optimist or a 420 or a Finn or any one of those dinghies, they all have adjustments to adjust the rake. If you think of the Optimist, up in the front there's a little wheel down the bottom, you can adjust the rake in order to adjust the feel on the rudder. I know there's a lot of Optimist sailors out there that measure the rake before they go in the water, and they have a number that they deal with, but conditions can change, your size can change, especially in an Optimist, size can change, body size. So you have to be able to work the rake to the feel. The 420 is another one that's very susceptible to rake. So we pin up and pin down here, changing the rake again for the feel. There's many classes, nearly all boats can be adjusted here. Okay, and if you go into some of the real professional sailors, the ones on the keel boats, for example, they will change even the mast heel, or they'll change the gate at the of where it comes through the deck to try and change the mast position in order to get better feel on the rudder. The last one I needed to just go through with you guys is I jumped over foils a little bit, where I talked about the foils here. For example, in a 420, which has a centerboard, if it's very windy, we can change the rake of the centerboard again to change this point. So if we put the centerboard, if you think of this as being the centerboard with the black dot here, if we change that back, we bring the black dot aft. Okay, so now the black dot is behind this one, which means we have lee helm, which means that in windy conditions, if you could all put this into perspective, if you've windy conditions and you rake your centerboard aft, you've moved your center of effort forward on the sails, inducing lee helm, and the reason you've done it is because you could not keep the boat flat, because it's just very windy, and the person full out on the trapeze, the main is out, everything is out, and you still can't keep it flat. Okay, then you change the centerboard rake, or in order to bring the rake aft a little bit, changing the center of lateral resistance, bringing it aft, and what that does, it makes the bow want to go away all the time, which means it reduces the amount of weather helm you have by having heel. I know I've put a lot of words in here now at the moment, but hopefully if you think it out, that's why we changed the rake on our centerboard. We can also do it in an Optimist if it's very windy. We pull it up a little bit in windy conditions, and we're doing the same thing. We just changed the balance of the boat a little bit, trying to reduce the amount of weather helm we have by actually changing the centre of lateral resistance with the foils. You'll probably realise I've left one out, which is course we steer. I mean, I use this one in a little bit different to what the 5Es would normally explain it as. But if you think of the course we steer as being the amount of rudder we use, so if we have all the other 5 working properly, then we shouldn't have to use the rudder. So the course we steer is done by the other 5, by balance, trim, sail setting, foils, all of those. I think, guys, this is pretty well the 6Es done. So hopefully you enjoyed the video, and I'll come back to you at the end when we've done a little bit of video showing the 6Es in operation.